Thanks, Maureen, and I appreciate everything that you do too. So, okay, where's Brendan? I think I'm at a podium. I'm up in front of people. I'm having a stress reaction. I think I've had a near miss with this before. It's great to be here. I'm so psyched that the summit is continuing on, and that you're all here. So, I have a very creative title for my presentation, but really it's true, we are in the business of risk. So what I wanted to talk about today was a little bit about organizational culture, a little bit about incident data, lots of numbers, lots of charts, talk a bit about behavioral data, and then tell some stories, share some experiences, a couple experiences that we as an institution have had over the last year, pretty much since I was here last May. So, question for you is, what is one of our greatest strengths of an organization? And John Gans alluded to this yesterday in his opening remarks. Any thoughts? We got great people, that's a good thing, okay? But one of our greatest strengths as an organization is that we're a learning organization. And John talked about this, and we learn from each other in a lot of different ways. And a learning organization is defined by a man named Peter Senge as a place where we're continually expanding our capacity. And we're working and learning together. And this summit is exemplifies what a learning organization does. But there are some other building blocks to what learning organizations are like, and they have a supportive learning environment, okay, throughout the organization, not just for our courses. We have learning processes and practices, and the leadership reinforces the learning. And there's other characteristics of a learning organization, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but many of these, all of these really, are part and parcel of how Knowles operates. Are we perfect with all of these all the time? Heck no, because we're people, right? We don't always click, but many of these elements of a learning organization can be found within Knowles. What's germane to my comments today, this morning, will be these three elements. Psychological safety, knowledge is shared, and we demonstrate learning. The psychological safety part is really important and goes to some of what Brendan was talking about this morning, having to do with having an atmosphere where employees and our students, but mostly employees, can raise their hand and say, we just had this happen to us and we want to talk about it. We want to share this information or this experience. While we require people to report incidents, that's not going to work unless people feel like they're in a safe environment where they can talk about these things and talk about their mistakes that they made. So we strive really hard to create this. It's also something that's being discussed in a little different context, and it's called a just culture, where employees can bring up these issues, bring up these mistakes, these incidents, and they can be treated by the organization in a way that's fair to everyone involved. So that's really important. Sharing knowledge, of course, is key, and then demonstrating learning, that's what I want to do here, is share some of what I've learned over the last year. So let's dive into it. We'll talk about injuries, and looking at where we are fiscal year to date. So this is September 1st through May 4th, when I made this chart. These are the injuries that we've been seeing so far this year. Nothing real surprising here. Athletic and soft tissue injuries make up 80% of our injuries. That's consistent over time, and nothing real surprising there. But there is a bright spot here, and that is that with skin infections, normally skin infections make up 42% of all our soft tissue injuries. This year, right here, they're accounting for 15%. So something good is happening. Last year we had a lot. We averaged 42. We only have 15 so far. So I've been harping on this for years now, and we've changed the medical protocols a little bit a few years ago, and maybe that is starting to have an effect. I think it's maybe a testament to really getting across a hygiene message to our students, being aware of the potential for skin infections, having antibiotics in our med kits that we can use, and jumping on these little blemishes and these wounds and treating them quickly and early and keeping them from becoming bad infections. So that's good. I ran a few other numbers and I looked at the activities that injuries are occurring in, and mostly they're occurring while we're hiking and camping. So that makes sense. That's what we do the most of, right? If you were on a rock climbing course and somebody got hurt hiking to a crag, they weren't rock climbing, they were hiking, so it would get put under hiking. Fairly mundane kind of activities. The injuries that occur on the more technical things are much fewer. Non-specific means that there was no particular activity that the person was doing at the time or that can be correlated with the injury. So, sun bumps, maybe some of the skin infections, possibly some athletic injuries. It's more an indicator that just being on the course, being exposed in the environment, or the ruggedness of the activities that we do sort of leads to an injury. Then I looked at ACT. This is sort of what the person was doing when the injury occurred. Again, non-specific is the leading category, but then you have falls, the slips, and overuse. Interesting that eating is up there so high. It's not a lot of incidents though, but we do get a fair number of dental injuries. So FYI, information to ponder. Yesterday, as Mark was talking, he was describing kind of the change in our student demographics and not so much the demographics as much as the courses that we offer, and the different lengths of courses. So it made me wonder about what injuries look like by course length. So I dumped the data down from 2005 to 16 and sorted through it yesterday and came up with this chart. And you can see that the shorter length courses, anywhere from 2, that might include a seminar, to 21-day courses, there's not a whole lot of injuries that occur on those courses. When you get to the 22 to 30-day, we've got 29% of our injuries are happening. Well, that makes sense because that includes our classic month-long 30-day wilderness mountaineering courses, that kind of thing. We have a lot of students that do that. And then 50% of our injuries are happening with semester-length courses. Okay, and so a couple things stand out for me is one, those are perhaps our higher populations of students. So we have more, and these are just numbers of incidents or percents of incidents. They're not incident rates. And also, these have longer exposure. Shorter courses, the 2 to 21 days, you're not out there as long. Maybe there's less chance of getting hurt, possibly. And I'm not sure in terms of overall enrollment populations how that corresponds, but it might be something that I'll play with later afterwards. So thought this might be interesting. But as I was doing this, then I got to thinking, well, what day of a course do people get hurt? So I looked at another chunk of data, and I found that this popped out. And this is all courses, regardless of length. And this is the day that the injuries were reported, that they occurred. So from 0 to 10 days, roughly corresponding with maybe the first ration period of a course, we're getting 30% of our injuries. and then it kind of drops off after that. So I did this many, many years ago, and it was informative, and I'm glad I did it again. I think what it reinforces is that first week, those first 10 days of course, when students are trying to adjust to the new environment, adjust to the rigors of what we're doing, whether it's paddling or hiking, that's when they're most prone to becoming injured. They're stumbling around camp, they're trying to get their systems down, things like that. So it's a reminder that those first few days are really important for injury prevention. So far this year, we haven't had many serious injuries. Probably the most serious, we've had 2 fractures. They were both occurred down in Patagonia. This was a climbing related injury. This young woman fell while lead climbing. She fell 1.5 meters, and she happened to bang her leg against the cliff. It hurt. They evacuated her. Turned out she had a fracture in her, fractured her ankle. I don't know exactly what bone. I didn't get that information. But she had some major surgery, both in Coyhaique in the hospital there, and then when she went home, she had additional surgery to repair her leg. And it's just amazing how something that simple can result in such a pretty severe injury. She had a great attitude throughout this thing. She corresponded with Raul, who's the program director in Patagonia, as she was back in the States and sending photographs and whatnot. So I think tough situation, but it has a positive outcome. But when you look at most of our injuries are happening in camp and while hiking, and then this sort of thing, a simple bang against a rock, those are the things we need to be watchful for as well as the more technical things. On the illness side, again, nothing too surprising here. Gastrointestinal illness, which is the red bar up here, that's our single greatest category of illness. It makes up about 28% of all illness. So this year we're sort of tracking normally, okay? And on average, gastrointestinal is about 64% of all communicable illness. So communicable is those illnesses that we can transmit from person to person, includes respiratory, flu-like, and other infections. Nothing really jumping out this year in terms of illnesses that's unusual. I will talk about mental health in a minute. Allergies are coming up a little bit, and we've seen that over some time. Allergy illnesses are popping up, but we have kind of a low bar for allergy reporting. If somebody has a reaction to something very mild and you give them an antihistamine out of the drug kit, that becomes a reportable incident. So we're capturing all of those. The person may not be really having that bad of a reaction, but it's getting put into the data. And so a few other metrics that I use throughout the year is just tracking medical incidents. And right now we're at 249 medical incidents, so that's injuries and illnesses. And year-to-date average for the same period is 269, so we're below average, which is great. And we're a little bit above 50% of where we should be on an annual basis. Evacuations, medical evacuations, which is sort of a subset of the medical incidents, we're below the year-to-date average, which is great, and below 50% of the annual average. So that's great. We are at the halfway point in our year, from September through April. In terms of program days and risk exposure, we're halfway through the year. The next half of the year happens in the next 4 months. So it'll be pretty intense, but it's great when we have these numbers going into the summer season. And then we calculate evacuation rates, and right now we're at 0.84 per 1,000 program days, which is a great number for us historically. It's below average. Last year we finished the year at 0.82. So I'm pretty confident, barring any kind of crazy thing happening this summer, that we'll finish the year in good shape. I wanted to talk a little bit about anaphylaxis. because last year we had a little bit of a surprise. Anaphylaxis is pretty unusual at Knowles. We carry epi, but we rarely use it. So I went back to 2000 and tracked it, and last year we had 10 anaphylaxis cases, which was a real spike. So far this year we've had 2 bee stings to the same person 2 different times. But kind of interesting that I dug into it a little bit to understand what the 20 incidents were about. 19 of them were for students, 1 was an instructor. Food was the vector for 11 of these incidents, and peanuts or nuts, I'm not sure which, were the culprit in 4 of them. Bees were 7. 1 was an unknown response, allergic response, and 1 was attributed to the environment. We used epinephrine 17 times, personal epi 11 times, that includes the instructor one, and Knowles epi 6 times. So out of those 20, we're using the syringe and ampule method to deliver the epinephrine. We did it 6 times. In the screening process, when students enroll, if they have a history of allergies, we're telling them that they need to bring epinephrine in an auto-injector and making them get that. Sometimes people have it, sometimes they don't, but we're having them bring it. And 3 of the incidents was the first-time reaction. 1 was a bee, 1 was an environment one, or the unknown one, and 1 was food-related. Last year somebody ate some quinoa and had a reaction. They'd never eaten it before. We are seeing in the health review process an increase in food allergies reported by students. I think last year it doubled from about 30 students that reported food allergies to about 60, 65, somewhere in there. So, but I don't know that that really corresponds with the 10 incidents we had last year. But interesting, something we always think about, but something that we don't always have to react to is anaphylaxis. So I wanted to talk a little about non-medical and behavioral data. So, you know, Emily gave that great presentation about the positive learning environment and how it should be integrated into our courses. And now I've got some sort of data, numbers, to correspond with what she was talking about. So far this year, we're in pretty good shape. The green bar is the annual average, so I don't have year-to-date averages for this. And the blue bars are year-to-date. So motivation incidents are down. Family emergencies are already at the annual average, but not very many of those. Drugs, alcohol, and tobacco incidents all combined are below average. And what is a little bit interesting is that the poor performance categories are kind of low, I think, based on this. And I have this chart, which tells a few different stories, but I've been keeping this for some time. This blue dotted line up here is all the performance-related incidents for these categories: safety and judgment, poor performance, verbal and physical misbehavior, and fitness. And then this dashed line is the student performance agreements that were used in relation to these incidents. And then this line is those students for these categories who separated. So the number of students that separate for poor performance is staying pretty consistent over time. It's not real high. It's a pretty low number. Back in 2005-ish, we changed the reporting structure so that if a student performance agreement was used, then that constituted a reportable incident. We plugged along. We really didn't have too many more incidents until about 2010, and that's when I took a look at the data, and I came to the realization that the use of student performance agreements correlated with positive results for the students. That is that students that were showing poor performance, a student performance agreement was used, that student went on to be successful on the course. So that kind of gave us a bit of a spike in here in the use of student performance agreements. So we started using them more. And then it tapered off. And then back in 14, 15, we started looking at inclusion incidents, doing work on bullying and whatnot. And so last year, well, in 15 and 16, we kind of spiked up and had a lot more. So we're calling more attention to it, right? So what I don't understand is why right now we're really pretty low. I think maybe it's from what Emily just described. You know, maybe the PLE is taking hold. Maybe we're working on that in such a way that it's actually showing results. I mean, I don't know. There's no way to prove that. But it's encouraging, for one thing. So we've only had 36 performance-related incidents, 33 SPAs used, and only 2 people have left so far for performance-related incidents. So that's a good trend. So hope that continues through the summer. Another aspect of behavioral incidents is mental health. And been tracking mental health related incidents for some time. And they hold pretty steady. We average 12 a year. Last year we had 18, and so far this year we've had 18. So we're on track to exceed that high point of 20. We just had a couple more come in, not last week, the week before. So that's interesting. One aspect of this is that I think we have, or maybe I have, maintained a fairly narrow definition of what is a mental health incident. And I've been talking to our psychiatrist and trying to think about, well, maybe that definition of what a mental health incident is could be expanded a little bit. And if that were the case, we probably would see this number go up. I think we see students that might have mental health issues going on, but they're not overt, they're not symptomatic, they're internal. The person is like maybe anxious about being on a course or maybe feeling depressed, but they're not expressing that. And so they just decide that they want to go home, and those people are being counted as a motivational incident instead. So I did go back and look at like 60 motivational incidents where anxiety, depression, a few other keywords were in the narrative, and it's a little hard to tell if it's truly a mental health or just a motivation. So it's kind of a tough one to get a handle on, but one that we're watching carefully. One way that we can get a handle on mental health in the field on our students is through our review process. So every student submits a health form. If that health form doesn't have any yes answers to it, they're in good health, they haven't told us anything, it gets cleared. If a student has a health condition that warrants further review, they get what we call a secondary review, and we dig in a little bit deeper. The admissions people and Joe Austin, who's our health review manager, work at that. So we've been keeping some numbers about health secondary reviews. The numbers in 2013 and 14 are a little soft, but Joe came into his position in 15, so 15 and 16 numbers are a little more firm data. And out of those, so those are all the secondary reviews. These are the reviews we've done for mental health. Mental health constitutes 43% of all our secondary reviews. We spend a lot of time with these people trying to understand their history, what medications they're on, how long they've been on them. We talk to therapists, counselors, teachers, parents, etc., to get a good picture of where these people are at. Many of these students that have disclosed the history of mental health and had a secondary review do really well on their courses. So out of, like last year, out of about 200 people, 8 had an incident that was related to the mental health condition that they reported on their health form. So it's not very many students. So a few years ago, we wanted to take a little closer look at this because secondary reviews don't necessarily capture everyone who might have a mental health history. Because if you have a mental health history and it's stable, you've been on meds for a few years, you wouldn't get a secondary review. So we picked a couple different segments of NOLS And in 2011, we looked at all fall semesters. We looked at every health form in the for that fall semester. And then this year, we decided, let's take a look at fall semester 2016 and see if we can compare and see what happens, if anything happened between those two cohorts and between those years. And then we thought, let's pick another cohort of students that aren't semesters. We picked WRW primarily because of the size, the number of students we have on WRWs. So this is how many students we looked at. This is the number of students with a disclosed history of mental health. They put it on their health form. It's interesting to see that the percentage is pretty consistent. Average is probably about 24%, somewhere in there, 23, a little more than 23. We thought that was interesting. There was no real significant change between fall semester 11 and 16. Those students with that history and had a secondary review, we didn't count them in 2011, 24% for the fall semester, and interestingly, 24% for the WRWs too. And then of that group of people, how many of them had a mental health incident? 5, 7, and 3. Fairly low number. So that's the percent of these people. And then we looked at how many mental health incidents occurred from students who did not disclose a history, and those were even smaller. And so combined, these accounted for a very small percent of the total students in these groups. So I think it tells us that mental health is a significant issue. It requires a lot of time and delicate handling on your part as instructors and a lot of work. That's not lost on us, but it is a small number of students. It's probably a disproportionate amount of work that you might have to put in for these folks, but it is a small number of people. So then I was thinking, okay, that's great. Well, what's that mean in the context of the bigger world? And I did a little digging online, and I found some data from the National Institutes of Mental Health. And for US adults, 18 and over, almost 18% of adults have had some kind of mental health condition, mental illness. That's a little lower than these, but this is all adults. This is everyone. So then a little smaller cohort, adults 18 to 25, which really corresponds well with our semester groups. It went up to almost 22%. So it's very close, a little closer to these percentages. And then when you look at youth, 13 to 18, this was a surprising number to me, that it's 46% of US youth have some sort of mental. And then these students do pretty well. So we looked at how do we gauge their performance on courses. So we looked at their grades, overall grades. So the secondary review cohort, which is the blue, they get A's and B's, mostly B's, a couple C's, a few passes. The semester and WRW cohort, again, a few more A's, a few more B's. Nobody fails, 1 D. Says a few things, is that by and large, these students perform well. And it also, I think, might indicate something with our grading system or the way that we assign grades that might warrant a little more looking into. But students rarely get F's at Knowles. And I think that's because we end up sending them home before they fail, before we give them a failing grade. Usually and often it has to do with their performance and their ability to comply with our risk management. So it makes sense that we wouldn't see a lot of F's. So interesting data. We can make these slides available to you afterwards if you want to get these numbers. Talk a little bit about some near-miss data. This was a quote that was in an incident report that was overheard by some instructors while student groups were contemplating a challenging pour-off. I don't know if it's an admonishment or an encouragement. Thank you, Kevin, for including it in the incident report. I don't know if you're still here. One group backtracked and went the long way around. The other group went forward into the pour-off and had a rockfall near miss. So, rockfall is our most common near miss this year. Typically it is. A lot of gravity, loose items, things like that fall down, boom. Technical system misuse is second. Rockfall incidents are happening hiking mostly, and it might be reflective of where we are in our time of year. We're not doing as much mountaineering, but we're doing a lot of canyon courses, or we've done a lot of canyon trips, at least out of Rocky Mountain, where there's quite a bit of rockfall, loose rock, that kind of thing. We've had one canoeing rockfall incident where a rock fell down from above and landed in the water 2 feet from a canoe that was eddied out, waiting to go down through a rapid. And then the activities during rockfall are hiking. Oh no, these are all near misses, excuse me. Hiking again, because we do a lot of it, and then rock climbing, and on down the list. Probably our most amazing and significant rockfall incident occurred last November during the New Zealand earthquake. And this is one of the scariest near misses that Knowles has probably experienced, if not ever, certainly in a long time. And there's people here that were involved in that, and were on a course in the field and exposed to this. This significant earthquake happened in the South Island of New Zealand, and a course was on the Clarence River, and they were practically at the epicenter of what is now called the Kaikoura earthquake. And I think it was, Dale told me it was a 7.8 on the Richter scale earthquake, and these folks were in a steep, narrow gorge, and the ground started shaking, and it shook for hours during the night, and rocks were falling down constantly for this whole time. And camping spots in this place are not always in the best locations to avoid rockfall, but it so happened that they were camped in a location this particular night, partly due to the high water that was in the river, in a spot that just by luck, by happenstance, was a spot where they had some relative safety from all the rocks that were falling down, which was great. I mean, it's like sometimes, luck plays a huge role in some of these near misses, and there, for the grace of a couple inches, we end up avoiding a serious injury and instead have a near miss. They experienced this through the night, and then the river kind of dried up. Suddenly the water level went down, and that really raised the attention of the instructors, and got on the sat phone and contacted the base, and what occurred was about 11 kilometers upstream from where they were camped, this big chunk of earth slid down, damming the river. Here's the river downstream, and it formed this huge lake behind the dam. And so it was like, we got to get them out of there right away. And we hired a couple of helicopters, and they came in, they flew in, they were able to get people out. They had to leave a lot of gear behind because there was only so much they could do. And we were fortunate that Dale was able to notify the New Zealand base, and they were able to get a helicopter company pretty quickly to respond to this, because that helicopter then quickly, after getting our group out of there, was consumed with other activities that they needed to do. It was the only helicopter company around. So we were fortunate to get them out of there as fast as, pretty fast, real fast, really. They had to leave a lot of gear behind. There was a lot of damaged canoes from rockfall that were along the side of the river. Eventually this breached, not in a catastrophic way, but it did ease through, and the river's now flowing through there, and it's created some new rapids. And I was talking to Karen yesterday about, well, what's this mean for the upcoming semester? And we have sent somebody down to kind of assess it, and we're trying to think, Karen and Mark Jordan, the program director there, thinking through what are the options and how can we use this river again, or if we can. So that was pretty wild. Another incident that we had over the winter was an avalanche in the Big Hole Mountains of Idaho. And this occurred not far from the Teton Valley base. It was on a level 2 avalanche seminar. So it was all instructors, all winter instructors, being led and taught by a NOLS instructor. And they were out for a day tour. And they were heading out to, explore this area and see about skiing it. And they'd approached it. They'd approached it. They'd done some snow pits. They'd seen a cornice drop up here, not the actual drop, but they'd seen where it had dropped. It hadn't created an avalanche. So they're collecting all kinds of information on the snowpack, because that's what they're doing. It's a level 2 seminar. Dug a lot of pits and decided to go on up. So they picked an ascent route through the mature trees. Their goal was to see if they could ski this. When they came out to here, they were able to measure the slope angle and take some additional, gather some additional snow data. They got up here and traversed across the ridge, again assessing snow stability and whatnot. And then they decided to ski it. And as a seminar, they were having the participants, again, who are NOLS instructors, be the leaders and lead this activity, lead this descent. And there was a question about, well, do I lead it as I would for students, or do I lead it as I would for this group of people who are accomplished winter instructors and good skiers? And so the answer was, lead it for this group. So the leader decided, we're going to put the line down over here, kind of right next to the mature trees, like right in here. And everyone ski to skiers left of my line and keep my line in sight. So that was the direction for how to stay together. And they had identified this as a steeper area. It's about 40 degrees. There was wind loading that was happening. So they knew that this was a starting zone of an avalanche, or possible avalanche. And had explained that this was something to avoid. But Willie decided, he interpreted the directions a little bit differently as opposed to skiing down this way, and he wanted to ski through here where there was some untracked snow. There were tracks in here from another party. So he was going to come down over here, and in his mind he's thinking that he's going to still be able to see Katie's line and stay within the confines of the direction. And we don't know exactly. I think what happened is once he started down, he might have just gotten a little bit further to skiers left than maybe he intended to. He clipped the edge of the slab, the start zone, and the thing started to slide. And he then tried to ski out of it, but was caught. And so he was caught up here and carried down to here. So it's about 400 feet. It wasn't a deep avalanche. He just stood up when he got to the bottom. He wasn't hurt. But people don't get caught in avalanches at NOLS very often. So this is unusual. An interesting sort of situation. The instructor did a terrific job of writing up an incident report for me and sending it to me, and I worked with him to kind of come up with it, an analysis of it. And The snow, the environmental factors were that the snow was pretty stable. It was, the avalanche forecast was moderate for the day. They saw the cornice fall. It didn't create an avalanche. They dug 5 pits and carefully evaluated the snow in there. And they understood that there were westerly winds blowing, sort of actively loading those loading zones. So they made a reasonable decision to go up there. They had identified this slab start zone. And then we get into these subjective factors of the descent management. One thing that's a little bit different with the way that this was lined out is often you would put the line, if this is the hazard, you want to keep people away from this side, you'd put a line down in here and have everyone ski away from the hazard. Here's my track, ski to the right. This was a little different because the track was over on this side and the instruction was keep my line in sight. A little bit different, and I think a part of that was because of who they were. They were instructors, not necessarily students. Then you had a little bit of, I'd rather ski the untracked slope over here than ski over here. And then while the slab was identified, the instructor, Jeff, who was running this, he feels that, he was very circumspect, he feels that there was a inadequate, there was a failure to indicate real clearly where this slab was and real clearly how to avoid it and to stay away from it. He thinks that, so there was lack of explicit direction, and he thinks that there was a little bit of excessive professional courtesy. So when you're out with your peers, it's hard to be real directive. When you're out with your students, it's a lot easier for us to be directive because that's our role. But when you're in a peer situation, that becomes more challenging. So I think that had something to do with this incident. And then we just had this individual error where Willie decided to take a different line than anyone else had planned to take. So, and then from a program point of view, and you can see this, I don't know if you can see this, this is 40 degree, this is the slab zone. It's an instructor seminar and we want to put those participants on the sharp end, making decisions and leading the activities. So by doing that, whether we do it as on a seminar or whether we do it on a course, giving that responsibility to our students is not without peril. Things can happen when we transfer that responsibility. And this is an example of what can happen. Fortunately, no one was hurt. So, another one I wanted to mention or talk about was an unroped crevasse fall that occurred last year on a Waddington Range course. This one, again, it was the 20th day of the course. They were traveling across the glacier. Instructors were present with the students, but the students were on the sharp end. They were the ones making decisions. They were leading for the day. And they came to this rock ridge, and this is the only photograph I have to describe it, but they basically came to this rock ridge, and the normal way to go around it is to drop down in elevation, go around, come back up the other side. The course leader had been on this route numerous times before. The students had the idea of, hey, why don't we go up and over it? And the course leader thought, well, that's reasonable. I've never done that. Let's give it a try. So that was the plan, was to go up and over that rock ridge. So they got to here, and I also have to credit the course leader wrote up a fantastic incident report that I worked with him on to kind of scale back down, edit down to a more manageable level. So I really appreciate the work he put into writing this up. They got to here and established a safe zone. Put all the students in there. They probed for crevasses and said, okay, stay here. 2 instructors then climbed this rock pitch here up to D and put in an anchor. And they decided that the rock pitch was too hard for students to do with their backpacks. So they were trying to come up with, they either had to abandon the plan or have an alternative. The 3rd instructor, while this was going on, had done a little scouting, and she found a snow ramp over here that led to a place where they could fix a line and have the students hike walk across here and then third class off and get to camp. So they decided that that would be the way they do it. So they created another safe zone. And in both times when they created the safe zone, they pointed out to the students that there was a moat, a crevasse where the glacier met the rock, and that exists. The safe zones were back away from the cliff, and when they got to here, they tied all the ropes together. Everybody was clipped into the systems, and they were doing one long running belay up to here, and then people would unclip from the running belay, clip into the fixed line, and go to here. It was working along pretty well. And then one instructor, there were some backpacks that were left down here. The instructor said, why don't we haul the packs up before these last two guys leave the safe zone. So he threw a rope down, had a guy, one of the students named Max, clip the rope to a backpack, and they started hauling it up. And then the rope or the pack got stuck on the cliff. And so then the instructor said, I'll lower you a bight of rope so that you can get the bight and then pull the pack away from the cliff, and then we can get it unstuck. The instructor here could not see down here. He couldn't see the bottom of the cliff. So he lowered the rope down. The rope stayed against the rock. It didn't get all the way down to the snow. So the student, Max, decided that he needed to go and step forward and reach it. So he decides to do this, and right as he's going to step forward out of the safe zone, he unclips from his system. And he takes a couple steps, and he goes to the moat, which was covered by snow, and punches through. He fell 20 feet into the crevasse, was able to wedge himself between the ice and the rock and stop himself, but then he lost purchase and he fell another 30 feet down to the crevasse and stopped. And it's like, holy shit. The other student couldn't reach him by voice contact, but the instructor that was here got down really quickly, and then the other instructor got down, and like within 15 minutes they had a rope to him. They established contact with him, they had a rope to him, and they had him out of there in about 15 minutes. And he injured his foot, and the next day he got evacuated, and it turned out that he broke a bone in his foot. So when the report came in, it was an injury, and I'm like, okay, another injury. And then a couple days later I read the details, and I went, oh my God, this is a near miss too. This is incredible. So they ended up getting everybody up and over into camp and whatnot. And here's where he fell through, right there. So from an analysis point of view, environmental factors is that the moat was covered with snow, but the moat as hazard was identified by the instructors a couple times to the students. And the weather wasn't a factor at all. It was a clear, calm day. And certainly, from a subjective factors point of view, unclipping was not part of the instructions. Okay, there was no reason for him to unclip. I'm not sure if I said this, but when he unclipped and started stepping forward, the other students said, you shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that. And the kid turned and told the guy, you can't tell me what to do. And he went on to step away from the safe zone. He said he was angry. He had some anger issues earlier in the course, and the course leader had counseled him earlier in the course for some of that behavior. He had also had one incident where he had unclipped while traveling on the glacier, and the instructors were quickly on that and telling him what was appropriate and what was inappropriate to do in terms of being clipped in. He said he was angry too because this took a long time. They got there at 12:30. This incident happened at 4:30, so they're sitting around a bunch. They're not doing much. And the kid said that the way that other students were talking was upsetting him and making him mad. And I think there were some snowball fights that were going on, and that was making him mad. So, he just acted emotionally. I think doing the pack haul was a reasonable thing to do. Those instructors could have come down, walked down through the fixed line and gotten their packs and walked back up, but it seemed reasonable to do the pack haul. Again, we have a student autonomy factor here. The students wanted to see if they could do this ridge. The instructors were supportive of that, but the instructors were in charge of the situation. I thought the supervision was appropriate, even given Max's previous history or experiences with some of his anger management and behaviors. Leaving those students in that safe zone on day 20 of the course without an instructor present in the safe zone, I think is reasonable. The managing the snow ramp up and then the transfer from the running belay to the fixed line required an instructor to be at that spot. So this is a way to map out all the contributing factors of an incident. There's many ways to do this. This is called an Ishikawa diagram or a fishbone diagram. And there's a lot of factors that were involved here, and this is just a visual way to sort of map them out and see them in some sort of sequence. Here's the decision to go over. The risk instructions were stated and reiterated. Max unclipped, and the crevasse fall happened. And these are, at the top I tried to put student actions or event situations that occurred over here, kind of in sequence. And these were instructor actions or influence, somewhat in sequence as it goes towards this event. So I don't use this very often, but I think it's kind of useful. So people do the craziest things, and I hope that I can make this video work. I think it will just start by itself. So that guy just ran down. This is a, where's the little thingy? There it is. This is a ski resort in Kazakhstan doing snow control with bottle rockets. So they shoot the bottle rocket up the slope and they go and trigger this avalanche. And they go and run behind the lift tower to hide. I think the avalanche might have gone a little bigger than they expected. So they're like climbing the lift tower. There goes their snowmobile. And the avalanche kind of ran away from the lift tower a bit. But so that human element is one that is always interesting and always challenging when we're dealing with this risk management. That was great. I found that on Facebook the other day, so I said, I got to show it. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was resilience engineering. And so back to organizational risk management. And the term resilience or resilient is being used quite a bit. I hear it more and more. And oftentimes it's referred to in a personal level or on a psychological level. But it's also used in sort of program or adventure risk management. Not adventure risk management, but industrial risk management. And it has to do with systems thinking and the way that systems work. And basically a resilient system is one that's flexible and adaptable. It's not simply focused on protection, but it's more importantly focused on production. So to translate that a little bit would be that we have our learning goals and objectives. We have our understanding and acceptance of risk. We understand that there's going to be some incidents that happen. And that's part of our ability to achieve our learning goals. And so we show a lot of adaptability, both before, during, and after events. Mostly, they use the term disturbances, so an incident. We've seen this happen. We've shown our resilience when we've had fatalities and other major events. We're able to weather those storms and come through them as a better organization. But resilient organizations or resilient systems and the people that make them happen show four potentials. And I think these are important for us all to keep in mind, that we show the potential to anticipate. We know what to expect. We show the potential to monitor because we know what to look for. We show the potential to respond. We know what to do, that we have response procedures in place, and afterwards we know what to learn, or we have the potential to learn. We know what has happened. A lot of this is it sort of parallels situational awareness that you would use in the field, but it's sort of situational awareness for an organization. And all these things are happening all the time. It's not a cycle, it's not a linear, it's constantly happening. So I think that Knowles is a very resilient organization, and this is a good reflection of how that works within this organization, within Knowles. So thanks, that's what I have. I think I'm on time, so happy, I'm around all day. If you have questions, I could maybe entertain a question or two, but again, I'll be around for the rest of the day. So. And I'd just like to thank you all for the hard work that you do in the field, because I know it's not easy. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it seems like it's too good to be true, and sometimes you're working your butt off. So I appreciate that.